He was standing beside my hospital bed when I opened my eyes. Not holding my hand, not crying, just standing there, arms crossed, staring at the monitors like he was waiting for them to flatline. My brother Derek. The same brother who had left me alone in that frozen storage unit for 6 hours in the middle of a January night in northern Ontario. The same brother who had driven away without calling 911. The same brother who, according to the nurse who checked me in, had told the emergency intake desk that I had wandered off on my own. Wandered off. Like I was a lost dog. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I did not grow up hating my brother. For most of my life, I loved him the way you love someone who has always been there. The way you love a person simply because they exist in the same story as you. Derek was 4 years older than me. He taught me how to ride a bike on the gravel driveway of our parents' property outside Sudbury. He drove me to my first job interview. He was the first person I called when my long-term relationship ended 2 years ago. I trusted him completely. That is the part that still costs me the most to say out loud. My name is not important. What happened to me is, our father passed away in October, lung cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by Thanksgiving. It was fast and it was brutal, and it left both Derek and me completely unmoored. Dad was not a wealthy man, but he had worked hard his entire life. He owned a piece of land outside Sudbury, about 40 acres, a house, a workshop, and 2 storage units he had rented out to local contractors for extra income. He also had a life insurance policy through his union, a modest RRSP, and a small amount in a TFSA. Nothing that would make headlines, but together, it added up to just over $340,000. Dad had updated his will 6 months before he died. I know this because his lawyer, Mr. Arsenault, told me so at the reading. The will was clear. The property and financial accounts were to be split equally between Derek and me, with one condition. We had to agree on the sale of the land together, and neither of us could force a buyout without a 60-day notice period. Derek smiled through the entire reading. I remember thinking that was strange. I was barely holding myself together. I cried through most of it, because hearing a lawyer read your father's wishes out loud in a beige office while the snow falls outside is one of the loneliest experiences a person can go through. But Derek sat there with this calm, satisfied expression on his face, like he had just won something. I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it now. What I didn't know then was that Derek had been carrying a debt load that would have stopped your heart. He had co-signed a private business loan 3 years earlier for a friend's landscaping company that collapsed inside of 18 months. The lender was not a bank. Private creditors in that situation do not wait politely. They had already put a lien on Derek's car. His credit was in ruins. His marriage had ended partly because of the financial stress, and he had been telling his friends, apparently, that once Dad passed, he would finally be able to breathe again. He needed his share of that inheritance fast. But the 60-day agreement clause was in the way, and I, his younger sister, was the only obstacle between him and immediate liquidity, so he decided to remove the obstacle. In December, Derek called me and said he wanted to go through Dad's storage units before the estate was officially settled. He said there were tools, equipment, personal items that needed to be cataloged. He said it would be good for us to do it together, as a family. He sounded like the brother I remembered, warm and practical and sensible. I said yes without hesitating. We drove out to the property on a Friday evening in January. The temperature that night was -22 with the wind chill. It was the kind of cold that doesn't feel real until you're in it, the kind that gets into your joints and doesn't let go. I wore my good winter coat, the one I bought last year, rated to -15. I thought we'd be in and out in 2 hours. Derek had a key to both storage units. He opened the larger one, told me the inventory sheets were on the shelving at the back, and said he was going to pull the truck around to load a few of the larger items. I walked into the unit. The light inside was dim, one of those hanging shop lights that flickers when it's cold. I heard the door behind me. I heard the padlock click. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I have had to recount it several times to several different people, and I need to make sure I never minimize it. I was locked inside a metal storage unit in rural northern Ontario in January, alone, at night, with no cell signal. I checked, over and over, in a coat that was not rated for extended outdoor exposure, with no water, no food, and no way to communicate with anyone. I screamed until my throat gave out. I banged on the walls until my hands went numb. I found a moving blanket on one of the shelves and wrapped it around myself and sat down on the concrete floor and thought, with a clarity I have never experienced before or since, that I might actually die there. I was found 6 hours later by one of the contractors who rented the adjacent unit. He had driven out late to pick up equipment for an early morning job. He heard nothing. I had stopped making noise by then, but he noticed the padlock on our unit was closed in a way he had never seen before, with the hasp twisted, which struck him as odd. He knocked. I answered. He called 911. I was treated for mild hypothermia and frostbite on 2 fingers of my left hand. Derek told the hospital that I had asked to be dropped off at the property alone and that he had assumed I drove myself home afterward. He said this to a nurse, out loud, while I was in a hospital bed 40 minutes away. Here's what Derek did not know. He did not know that 3 weeks before that night, I had spoken to Mr. Arsenault about my concerns. Not about Derek specifically at that point. I had no proof of anything, only a feeling, a low hum of unease I could not explain. But I had noticed Derek pushing hard on the timeline for selling the property. I had noticed him asking questions about the insurance payout that felt slightly off. I had noticed him mentioning, twice, that the 60-day clause could technically be waived if both parties agreed in writing. Mr. Arsenault had a colleague, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in estate disputes. She was the one who suggested I take certain steps proactively. She called it protecting the asset and the beneficiary simultaneously. Patricia was not warm or chatty or comforting. She was precise and methodical, and she spoke in a tone that made you feel like every word she said was load-bearing. I liked her immediately. On Patricia's advice, I had already filed documentation with the estate that flagged any unilateral action on the accounts as requiring dual verification. Both Derek and I would have to appear in person, with identification, to authorize any movement of funds. The life insurance policy had been similarly flagged through the insurer's beneficiary dispute process, which freezes disbursement when a formal challenge is filed. It was a standard protective measure, Patricia told me, used often when there are concerns about coercion or undue influence. I had also, on Patricia's advice, done something else. Something small but significant. I had filed a vulnerable person notation with my family doctor and registered it with the local Ontario health team. It was a precaution, Patricia said. A paper trail. Something that would make any future claim about my mental or physical competence much harder to fabricate. And on the night I was discharged from the hospital, before I had even fully warmed up, I called Patricia from the hospital parking lot. My fingers were bandaged. My voice was not steady, but I told her exactly what had happened, and she said 4 words that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Good, we're ready now." Derek appeared at the hospital the following morning. Not frantic, not apologetic, not falling apart the way a brother who had made a terrible mistake might look. He was composed. He brought a coffee from Tim Hortons, which I did not touch. He sat in the chair beside my bed and said he had been so worried, that he had tried to reach me all night, that he couldn't understand what had happened. I let him talk. The OPP Ontario Provincial Police had opened an investigation based on the emergency call from the contractor and the circumstances of how I was found. A detective named Sergeant Beaumont had spoken to me the previous evening. She was thorough and unhurried, and she listened in a way that made me feel like every detail I gave her was being filed somewhere permanent. I told her everything. The timeline, the call from Derek, the drive to the property, the sound of the padlock. She told me not to confront Derek directly. So I sat in that hospital bed and I listened to my brother tell me he had been worried, and I nodded, and I said very little. He then, after about 20 minutes of this performance, shifted the conversation, subtly at first. He mentioned that the estate timeline was getting complicated. He mentioned that the private creditor had been applying pressure. He said, and I remember this sentence exactly because I have repeated it to multiple people, that it might be easier for both of us if we just moved things along before this drags out into spring. I said I was still recovering and couldn't think about that right now. He nodded. He said he understood. He squeezed my bandaged hand, which hurt, and I did not pull away. He left 20 minutes later. That afternoon, Derek contacted Mr. Arsenault's office and requested an emergency probate hearing to expedite the estate settlement. He submitted documentation arguing that the delay in settling the estate was causing financial harm to both beneficiaries, and requested that the 60-day clause be reviewed. He also, and this is the part that still makes me catch my breath when I think about it, submitted a letter suggesting that my recent health incident raised questions about my capacity to participate in estate decisions in a timely manner, and that an independent assessment might be warranted. He was trying to have me declared unfit. He had planned this. The storage unit was not a moment of anger or panic. It was a step in a sequence. He needed me incapacitated, or at minimum destabilized enough that my judgment could be questioned. The hospitalization was supposed to support the narrative he was building. He had probably been planning it for weeks. What he did not know was that Patricia had already anticipated this move. The vulnerable person notation I had filed was a 2-edged document. It protected me from exactly the kind of challenge Derek was now mounting. My doctor had assessed me as fully competent, and had documented that assessment formally. The notation existed to protect me, not flag me. Mr. Arsenault called Derek's lawyer, and rejected the capacity challenge before it ever reached a hearing. The following week, Sergeant Beaumont contacted Derek. I was not present for that conversation, but I was told about it afterward. She brought him in for a formal interview at the Sudbury detachment. He came with a lawyer, which told everyone everything they needed to know. The lawyer tried to frame the storage unit incident as a misunderstanding. Sergeant Beaumont laid out the physical evidence, the padlock configuration, the timeline, the fact that Derek's truck had been caught on a trail camera on a neighboring property leaving the site at 9:14 p.m. with no return recorded, the fact that Derek's phone had pinged a cell tower 40 kilometers away at midnight while he claimed to have been trying to reach me. The lawyer stopped talking. Derek was charged with criminal negligence causing bodily harm under the Criminal Code of Canada. His lawyer indicated he would be pursuing a peace bond arrangement, but the Crown prosecutor, a young woman who spoke with a quiet intensity that reminded me of Patricia, told me she intended to push for a full trial. The estate proceedings were paused pending the criminal investigation. The private creditor, having been notified of the criminal charges, accelerated collection proceedings against Derek's personal assets. His car was repossessed 3 weeks later. He lost his apartment lease because the creditor successfully argued a judgment lien. Derek moved into a friend's basement in Espanola. The inheritance he had tried to take from me, or more precisely, take me out of the picture to access, became completely unreachable to him from the moment the charges were filed. Patricia filed a formal notice of beneficiary dispute on my behalf, which effectively froze Derek's access to his portion of the estate pending resolution of the criminal matter. Under Ontario estate law, a beneficiary who has committed a crime against another beneficiary in relation to the estate can be subject to forfeiture proceedings. We were not there yet, but we were moving toward it deliberately. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think this is the part people don't always say out loud. There were nights in February when I sat in my apartment in Sudbury, heat turned up as high as it would go, and I felt something I did not have a clean name for. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief. It was something older and heavier than either of those things. I had grown up with this person. He had taught me to ride a bike. He had driven me to that job interview. And somewhere along the way, he had calculated that my life was worth less than $170,000. I don't know when that happened. I don't know if there was a single moment where he crossed a line he knew he was crossing, or if it happened gradually, incrementally, one small rationalization at a time, until what he was doing felt reasonable to him. I will probably never know. What I know is that the cold in that storage unit was real. The frostbite on my fingers was real. The 6 hours of silence where I did not know if anyone was coming were real. And whatever grief I carry about my brother, whatever sadness lives alongside the anger, it does not undo any of that. My physiotherapist, I needed one for the nerve sensitivity in my left hand, asked me once if I had forgiven Derek. I told her I was working on understanding the difference between forgiveness and permission. Forgiveness, I think, is something you do for yourself. Permission is something you give to the person who hurt you to do it again. I was working on the first one. I would never grant the second. The trial date has been set. Patricia is still on retainer. Mr. Arsenault handled the estate filing extensions without issue. And the 40 acres outside Sudbury Dad's land, the workshop, the storage units, the gravel driveway where I learned to ride a bike is still there, still waiting, still mine to decide what to do with. I have been out there twice since everything happened. Once in March, when the snow was still heavy on the spruce trees, and the light was that particular pale gold you only get in late winter in northern Ontario. Once in April, when the ground was thawing and everything smelled like wet earth and cold water and the kind of beginning that doesn't announce itself, it just quietly arrives. Both times I stood in the driveway for a long time without going inside. Both times I thought about my father, who worked that land for 30 years, and who believed, I think, that leaving it to both of us equally was an act of love and fairness. Both times I thought about how a single decision, one phone call to Patricia, one conversation with my doctor, one quiet act of preparation had changed everything that followed. I am not a person who likes to tell people what to do. But I want to say this carefully and mean it. If there is someone in your life who makes you feel like your safety is negotiable, your needs are inconvenient, or your existence is something to be managed around rather than respected, pay attention to that feeling. It is not nothing. It is information. Do not wait until you are sitting on a concrete floor in the dark to take it seriously. I am Hannah. And I got out.